So welcome everyone in a new episode of Candid with CredAble. Today I have Amitabh Misra with me, who I know from my Snapdeal days when he was the CTO of Snapdeal, and he helped the company scale its technology during the e-commerce boom around 2015. It's my absolute pleasure that I got a chance to work directly with a leader like Amitabh. He's currently leading engineering at Adobe, but has a very rich experience in technology and entrepreneurship across India as well as America. So welcome, Amitabh. Thanks for giving your time. And I'm delighted to have you on Candid with CredAble.
Thank you, Nitin. Good morning, everyone. And Nitin, pleasure to be here. It's a delight to be speaking with you and your colleagues. Happy to share my experiences.
Thanks, Amitabh. So I'll get right to it. I would start by asking you, Amitabh, if you can tell us who is Amitabh, both personally as well as professionally, starting with your education, your early career days, and where you are today. Just help us out with that.
Absolutely. So let me start with education. And that should also say how much I value it as one of the primary reasons, enabling me to be where I am. So I did my undergrad from IIT Kanpur back in '95. And then after a couple of years of experience, I went to Silicon Valley, where I pursued, computer science at Stanford University. And then finally, around 2010, I did an MBA from Berkeley. So those are the degrees, but in between, I've been, constantly an advocate and a pursuer of continuous learning. So I have always been throughout my career reading a lot of technology, keeping myself abreast, trying out new technologies, attending courses, seminars, what have you. So education, I would say, is a lifelong pursuit. And I continue to do that even today. And I think one of the big reasons why I have been able to keep pace as the technology has changed very, very fast is constant education. I can still get down to production system and troubleshoot some of the most complex problems. It is, in my opinion, even more important for people who are starting, my advice, starting afresh, to be in that pursuit because of the layer of abstractions that have gotten in technology that has gotten created. So on one hand, it gets you to build a system very fast. On the other hand, it obscures you from the layers of technology when you're trying to solve complex problems or define big systems. So you got to constantly learn through the layers. That is the education part. On relatively personal front, I'll talk about a few things. When I talk that I value education is that I have been a risk taker in my own, world. So I have worked in multiple startups, including the last one where I ran it from scratch. But I have been dabbling in startups for a long time. And I think it has been immensely valuable for me because they give you an accelerated pace of learning and confidence and the ability to manage things, right? So I'll give you an example of risk-taking specifically. My first job was in a chemical company called Lupin. In 2 months, I figured this is not where I belong. And I wanted to do things where I could relate to what I was doing and creating impact and so on and so forth. So I accidentally landed into thought process of how computer companies are run and went to Infosys. But when I was in Lupin, I was like, locked into a shell and I didn't have any idea of what I could be doing. I just knew that I didn't want to do what I was doing at Lupin. So I quit the job without having a job with me. And then I kept exploring for next 8 months. Now that's a very hard decision for somebody who's just come out of college and has been 2 months into the job to be able to do that and then not have a career path or vision or anything at all. I have done that a couple of times when I was completely not sure that I was progressing and I did not have a path forward. I just quit and started exploring. And I think that is one of the reasons why, I have been able to land on some of good opportunities. So one should not be afraid of taking risk on venturing in the unknown, as long as you can keep to it. Eventually, if you persist and persevere, good things will come out of it. So that's the risk-taking part of my something that is very core to my being. Then I have been an ardent believer of and passionate about product engineering. So I feel that the kind of transformation that product engineering brings to companies and society and everything else, at least at this stage of evolution of mankind, is very profound. Not to say that other fields such as sales and marketing and operations and logistics are not important, but I think the times in which we live, the kind of rapid progress that technology and technology-led companies are making is way bigger than anything else. I'm fortunate that I'm passionate about that same thing, and I therefore have been able to apply my passion and my knowledge to create whatever I have been able to create. And all my life, through my technology journey, I have created very, very large systems, very, very large scale systems. And that's what I've been doing all my life, like global scale. So I was part of the team that wrote Visa's credit card system when that was the largest system, second largest system in the world, after NASDAQ, I believe. Then I, was instrumental as an architect to create world's largest Java-based web services platform when web services and Java on the server side were relatively concept stage. And then, you were with me in Snapdeal, that was one of the largest systems in India, but more importantly, created cloud native, and not too many companies of that scale were cloud native, way ahead of its time, right? And it created in a very, very short time of less than 3 years, right? So I think the thing that I continue to believe, and that's why I did MBA and still stuck to technology, because I am that kind of believer. Most people use MBA to switch careers.
Right.
So that in a nutshell is sort of who I am from a personal, professional point of view. Absolutely personal levels, I'm a person who is driven by values. And I have a set of core values: people, empathy, and caring, and helping people grow is the number one of those. And that's how I have operated.
Yeah.
So to me, success of every individual who is around me is of ultimate, is my ultimate goal. Everything else comes out automatically, is what my experience is.
Thank you so much. I think, Amitabh, for opening the floor. I think very inspirational opening, and it has given me ample things to double click on, and we'll deep dive on some of these aspects. But totally aligned with you when you mentioned, I think, what we build together at Snapdeal. Most of the people that I know, and I've been speaking to some of the alums of Snapdeal, they're super proud of, I think, what you did in terms of the overall scaling of those platforms and truly building a cloud native, like you said, platform back in those days when it was a totally new concept. So totally aligned on that. And another couple of things that you mentioned were really insightful. One, of course, was even today when you are at this position, even then you are saying that constant learning should never stop. In fact, I was reading a book yesterday where I read a quote which said, "Learning how to learn is a great reward." And this is what I could really relate quickly when you were talking about that. So just give us an example. What is it that you're currently learning? I think any specific courses or any specific literature that you're currently on that would help our listeners also to relate to it.
So I think, I think at every stage, it is a different kind of learning that can possibly happen. And in terms of a framework, I think the older you get, the more your experience is sort of holding you back. So while you read new technologies and you read new management principles and way of working and so on and so forth and processes, uh, what you realize is that all the experience that you've gathered is actually boxing your thinking, and it becomes harder and harder to think out of the box, right? On one hand, that is very useful because that makes you very efficient. All this experience and all this knowledge, makes it very useful. On the other hand, thinking out of the box, thinking new things becomes harder and harder, right? So what I have been sort of at a philosophical level thinking about is how to sort of reinvent myself in terms of being able to think what I'm constrained, with, because of all the knowledge that I've acquired. I just read a book on rethinking by Adam Grant. He's a Wharton professor, and I would recommend people to go and read that book. And that's a phenomenal book, and it talks about these things, how people get siloed because of their psychological biases into thinking and more firmly thinking the manner in which their life has taken shape. Right. And rethinking is an extremely valuable capability if you can build it. And I personally find it exhilarating because I have in general been a very reflective person. So every once in a while I would sit back patiently and think about what I have done, how could I have done things better, and so on and so forth. So I've been on that journey anyways, and I continue to do that. The other thing that I have always believed in and continue to practice, that you can learn from everyone and from everywhere, right? Yeah. So even today, I tend to find time to sit with developers, have lunch with first level managers, with people who are hands-on, all the way to people who are senior executives. And everybody brings a very, very different perspective. And so I try to grasp from everyone, and then the kind of mental graph that I'm able to make to orchestrate big initiatives comes very naturally and efficiently. Of course, I do the mundane of reading all the new technology and new management principles and such, as I said. But I think this is one of the big journey. Another tactical thing, Adobe is a great company in the enterprise SaaS world. Mm-hmm. So I had most of my career worked in B2C companies and platform side, but this was my second company where I was working on enterprise SaaS, and was an eye-opener. Though I would report that because I operate on first principles, I have been fairly successful in this role, where things were quite new to me, at least from a organizational structuring point of view.
Very insightful, Amitabh. Just to give listeners a better context, if you can share, I think, what is the current portfolio that you're managing at Adobe? That would help.
Yeah, so I, headed the R&D for Experience Cloud. Adobe primarily has, 4 business units. The first one everybody is familiar with, which is Document Cloud, the PDF world, for document productivity. The second is Creative Cloud, the likes of Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, that suite of products that helps creative people around the world create their wares. The third one is Digital Experience or Experience Cloud, which, where we build technologies that power world's enterprise companies to manage their customers' digital experiences, omni-channel, personalization at scale, analytics, what have you. And then there's ad and publishing and education business unit. So I head R&D for the Experience Cloud, and develop products like the platform, Adobe Experience Platform, Campaign, Adobe Journey Optimizer, AEM, and Marketo, and the likes. So that's what I do, entirely the online space. And it's a it's a very rich and fast growing area, and we are building phenomenal products that power almost all the top 500 companies plus more in the digital experience world.
Got it, Amitabh.
India's R&D is the largest outside the headquarters. And a significant part of the work that happens in Experience Cloud happens in the R&D org.
Understood. So Amitabh, the next question that I have is, I think it's very related to, I think probably you would be the most optimal person to answer this question today, because you have worked with several startups, large companies. Today also, I think you're handling a very big portfolio, and you have also worked across the geographies. So if you want to, and this is a two-part question actually, if you look at the last 2 decades, how do you think the overall technology stack has transitioned in the last 2 decades? What do you think has changed specifically? And what is it that has remained still the same since the last 2 decades? And the second part of this question is, what do you see has been the impact of this in India's context? So how has India's technology landscape changed in the last 2 decades?
Right. So I think pretty much everything that we see around and have around us has basically shaped up in the last 2 decades, right? So if you look at modern architecture, it's basically distributed web services, architecture with little changes of getting to microservices and stuff in this decade, but it's basically web services based distributed architecture. And that was shaping up, and I was one of the people who was building the first ones in 2000, 2001, 2 timeframe, right? So that's when it started, and it has, shaped up well. You have had explosion of database and storage, right? In the first decade, 2001 to 10, where the limitations of an RDBMS reached its, the limitation, basically its power reached its peak, and it was limited, and you saw explosion of NoSQLs, various kind of NoSQLs, which would compromise on one of the factors that RDBMS would hold to, but give massive performance and scalability on the other side. So big data technologies like Adobe and such, and on the other side, a whole bunch of NoSQLs, columnar, document oriented, and such, right? This decade, the big changes that you see are, for most part, which have had an impact, are AI and cloud. Now, both AI and cloud were there, cloud more recently, but AI has been there for a long time. But what has happened dramatically different from previous years, that the compute power became big enough or cheap enough for AI to become real. So since the beginning of the decade, you've seen an explosion of applications powered by AI. And I think that journey continues with more and more compute coming at cheaper and cheaper cost, and compute that is designed for AI workloads, right? So the GPU chips and the research that is going on there. On the cloud front, the cloud had started taking shape before. But as you know, when we were writing Snapdeal on cloud native, none of the companies in India of any meaning and scale were actually operating on cloud. So we tried to build a native applications, and we reaped enormous benefits of scalability and such being cloud native. And you remember the big billion day where Snapdeal was the only one standing, and every other e-commerce company went down. So cloud has emerged in a big way, but what has and it started emerging in the last decade itself, but what has dramatically changed is managing the cloud programmatically. So if you remember, when we were building in the early part of the decade, we were building cloud technology and such. We were mostly using compute and storage and maybe a bunch of networking capabilities like load balancer and stuff like that. But we used to have a large team to run production support and DevOps. What has happened now is all the production support are hardcore developers. And everything that you can imagine on cloud is available programmatically, right? Spinning up instances and with Kubernetes and containers and all that is evolved to the next level.
Yeah.
So you can really scale at a micro level and scale up and scale down. And in terms of cost, in terms of the visibility on COGS and everything else, cloud has come a long way, and that's been a dramatic shift. And then on AI front, like I said, we have made very rapid progress. So I think overall, all this has impacted things in a very big way. So much so that everything that we felt was great technology and great technology companies building stuff like that is increasingly becoming commoditized. So building an e-commerce site is now a commodity, right? It's no longer, a big thing.
Yeah.
You get off the shelf parts and you can put them together and get a, mid-scale, stack running very quickly with very few hands.
Right.
So as the compute is becoming cheaper, as everything is getting programmatic, things are becoming increasingly commoditized. But at the same time, newer things are coming where innovation stuff is happening. Now, towards the later part of the decade, more recently, there are these trends about, metaverse and Web3 and so on. But those are rather, I would say, very early nascent concept stage. Nothing material or impactful has yet hit.
Yeah.
While proof, POC kind of level they have, but they are still promise of the future.
Right, Amitabh. So I think since you specifically touched on one topic, which was that a lot of things are becoming commoditized, right? I want to touch base on a question that I had for you on the similar lines, where we always talk about, let's say, creating a moat through product or some kind of a business ecosystem that we're developing around the company. But do you think there is something which we can develop as a moat specifically through technology so that you cannot become commoditized, let's say in next 2-3 years or so? How do you take that? How do you create that competitive edge compared to the competitors?
I don't think so. Anything that you work today, if it's value, it will proliferate. And the moment it'll proliferate, people are going to build technology to ease it and make it commodity. That's what I think, right? The moat that you build is not around a specific technology. The moat that you build is building a setup, a culture, an organization which can keep creating innovation faster than the others. That's the moat, not a specific technology that once it is out, people can look at it, see it, and copy it.
Yeah.
And so a technology will not last as a moat. A cultural setup, an organization, a set of processes, these are far harder to get, right? And sometimes even if a company is able to do it, it's even harder to actually hold.
Yeah.
You know how it is, right? A couple of leaders build a stellar team, an organization, a stack, process, culture, everything intact, and they leave and everything evaporates, right? So creating that is difficult, but it's a big moat, and holding to that is even harder. And I think that's what people should look up to, an ability to constantly creating innovation. The second thing that you can hold on, I don't know whether you'd call it a moat or not, but when you're creating technology and you build a big customer base who trust you, whose use cases are powered by your innovation, there is an exit barrier, right? So unless somebody creates a technology better, it's not going to automatically trigger a switch.
Right.
There's a cost to switch. So I think creating innovation faster and having a speedy adoption are two things that will allow a company or an organization to continue to hold on to what they have built far longer than change in technology.
Got it, Amitabh. And since you specifically touched upon the cloud as one of the emerging areas which can be very prominent in the upcoming years. See, what we also have been seeing is there is a lot of adoption across multiple clouds. So there are companies who are not only running on, let's say, one single cloud today, but they have a couple of clouds that they either have to be, or let's say for a BCP perspective, they have chosen that to do. And then we are seeing related technologies also emerging now. So there are systems like Anthos who give you capability to orchestrate multiple clouds as well, right? So what do you think on a multiple cloud strategy? Do you think that as a common phenomenon that can also emerge? And could there be an opportunity, or would there be a need of having such kind of a tools? I think while Kubernetes also has some capabilities in terms of orchestrating across multiple clouds, but we are seeing more and more technologies evolving around this. So what do you think about this?
I think it is something that everybody should be very mindful of, right? Not all public clouds are equal. Some have a edge over the others because by virtue of having started earlier, right? Yeah. So when you start consuming the basics of the cloud, you find some clouds ahead in some respect than the others, right? That said, at some level, innovation, which plateaus everywhere, will plateau here as well, yeah. Which means that there'll be more and more competition coming in. And then the clouds will become sort of equal in terms of having equal weight and power and stuff like that. And therefore, companies should be able to leverage a multi-cloud strategy. I think without that, it'll be impossible to survive. Now, one thing that is very profound there, and you have to understand that there's not a whole lot of innovation happening on the most elemental level of cloud, like compute, like storage, like network. And so companies are fairly comparable there. Maybe somebody is a little cheaper and somebody is a little more expensive. Also, all the technology that manages all that. What is emerging as a differentiation is the services that these clouds have. So they are going up in the value chain, and compute is not where they make most money, but they offer a high level service. For example, Redshift offering from Microsoft, right? AWS. Right. So the cloud companies are going to increasingly offer service as a high level construct. Similarly, you will have companies which are not cloud companies, but they will start offering their wares as a service. It's not even available as a software. Companies like Snowflake, right? You just consume Snowflake on the cloud. So increasingly, as the cloud becomes more and more similar in terms of capability and cost on the basic elemental level of compute, storage, network, and so on and so forth, HADR kind of things, their differentiation will come in the high level service. And the high level service world is just way too big for one cloud to get it all, right? So I think in that sense, if you're building a service which is on top of cloud services, then you have to be able to pick and choose the best of the services available across cloud. That time is, in my opinion, very near. Okay. Understood. So I would say that people should have in mind and in their radar the ability to pick cross cloud service. Also, if you think that in terms of what is emerging in terms of architecture, earlier the architecture was a lot around real time, still there, but the amount of data that companies are handling and intelligence and all, a lot of it is getting async. Streaming architecture basically powering that. And in that architecture, it doesn't matter where one part of your system is and where the other part of the system is. It might as well be in one cloud, one region, one set of proximity servers, or it might be completely global, poles apart on a different cloud and a different availability zone and talking to each other. Yeah. And the network cost between them is going to increasingly go down. So I think the emergence of cloud usage by next level application companies is going to go in that direction.
Got it, Amitabh. The next question that I have for you is from the perspective of developers. So I think this question can actually come in the mind of a developer who is just an entry level to a developer about, let's say, between 5 to 10 years, and even a senior person as well. Because I think we talked about that the technology has changed so much in the last 2 decades. And if you talk about just the programming language itself, so initially we were talking about C, C++, then we had Java, .NET as a next set of frameworks that came forward. Then there was a transition in terms of a lot of AI/ML stuff being done on Python. Then Django actually added as a capability to make it more like a server side language. Then, of course, Node.js came into the picture, and today we're talking about Golang. And even one of the fresher just out of the college was actually talking to me, and he was asking me, should I start learning Solidity now, which is the programming language for Ethereum, right? So with all of this ever-changing technology landscape, how should a developer define their career path so that they have a long-term success eventually?
So it's a very difficult question. It's like saying, can you predict the future? And I would say that it will be very boastful if anybody would say they can. But what I would share is how I would think about it, right? So if you look at technology is moving from lower level of the stack to higher level, right? And usually does. And I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. So earlier there was, people used to run their software directly on chips with cards and all, right? And when the high level of the next level of higher stack came in, nobody used to do that, which is the operating system.
Yeah.
And when there's a world of operating system innovation happening, a lot of operating systems were coming, right? And then it's settled. It's going to be Linux, it's going to be Unix, and it's going to be Windows, maybe a couple. All the other operating systems went away. And the next level of innovation was languages. There was a big proliferation of languages, and a lot of were adopted, a lot of them went away, and you see lesser and lesser of new languages coming. They are coming, but and we are moving up the stack. So then you go to the next level of web layer, and you have frameworks like Spring, and you have frameworks like Ruby on Rails, and so on. So technology keeps moving, and at some point, the layer that is most talked about with innovation and all settles down in a couple of options, and then people are talking about the next level of technology, right? So what you want to do is probably not end up learning, you're vesting yourself too much in one language, which is going to go, out of fashion, right? The COBOLs of the world kind of thing, right? You might want to stick with something like a Java, which, but it's very hard to predict where it is headed, right? So I think the number one lesson is don't just stick very hard to language. If you see other things, learn a couple so that you can shift and adjust, and you're not wedded completely to something, and you keep going, and one day you become obsolete. Right? So have a couple of options. You understand this is also important from you, from a point of view of you having a holistic perspective, strength and advantages, disadvantages of one versus the other, helping you make the right choice, right? The second thing I would say is I would tend to stay away from technologies that are not an open world, and they are promoted by certain individual companies. It's hard enough for a company to rule the world in any way. It's much harder to have that company have its language rule the world.
Yeah.
I would tend to, I'm not talking about language, I'm talking about language plus frameworks plus databases plus everything else in the stack, right? That you ought to stay more towards open. It always has wider adoption, almost always have wider adoption, right? So that is one thing that I would do. And the third thing is the thing that we started our session with, constant learning. You have to continuously keep looking for newer and newer things to learn and keep pace with the technology. Even if you've picked the technology that eventually is the last one to survive, world's attention will move to the next layer of the stack. So, while you may have made the right choice in one sense of picking a language which outlasts every other language, but nobody cares about language anymore, just like nobody cares about the operating system anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
Like that. So I think those are the frameworks through which I would make my choices.
So very well articulated, Amitabh, and that's the reason why I think a lot of developers can easily relate to you as well. I think when they're speaking to you, because you've actually precisely in 3 points you've articulated that well. While this may not give a very clear answer to the developers, but still you have given a framework that they can actually apply when they're actually thinking about, let's say, a technology shift or even a job shift, etc. Next question that I have is related to product engineering. Since you mentioned, I think, and I believe, I think that is a core strength area that you have as a leader. When you're working with, especially with startups, where you have, let's say, limited resources, but you want to achieve a lot more, right? What do you think works really well when you want to balance between, let's say, a faster feature delivery on the product versus at the same time keeping your platform scalable and reliable? What do you think, what is that key ingredient that one should keep in mind so that you can actually keep this balance in the company?
So first of all, you should have a formula of how much to invest in getting something quickly to market and therefore back your way, and how much you should invest in stability. Okay. Second is that the formula is not constant. It changes over time. So if I am building a new stack, I would be very liberal about hacking your way through, because getting something out in the market is so important from an existence point of the company. If the company doesn't remain, you can build all the technology you want and you won't get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Getting things to the market is extremely important, right? Once you've had a year, 2 year of stack in the making, you would realize that if you don't do things right, then that crappy stack will hold you back from the next set of innovation at a speedy level, right? So if your company is lucky enough to survive year, 2 year, 3 year, then it'll be killed in the fourth one if you don't get it right.
Yeah.
So I would say year, 2 year, you should just focus entirely on building feature, getting adoption as fast as you can, and don't worry too much about getting your platform and everything else very stable, this thing, and ready for the next generation and so on. After that, you should start investing in that. And the way in which you do that is, at that stage, you should look at what part of my stack is holding me back. And you go and refactor that. One of the reasons why you should do it at a later time also, because the things that work in the market and the things that don't, whatever ends up happening in 2 years will profoundly define what you should be making more robust and what you should throw away.
Yeah.
Right. Let's say I'm just making it up, but let's say something on the back end in catalog is the most sacrosanct thing. But you discover that 2 years later only, right? In the beginning, you just, you don't know whether catalog or pricing or what will eventually become the bedrock of your entire stack, right? So 2 years later, you would have figured that out.
Yeah.
And you will see that if anything changes in catalog, it has a ripple effect across the entire ecosystem. And then you go back and fix, and you also know what is working and what is not. So you redo that part of that. After 3 years at Snapdeal, we were quite a big stack.
Yeah.
Right. And at that stage, Nitin, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Amitabh.
So in 3 years, we had maybe a 500-600 people engineering team, and we had about 70 or 80 systems. And at that stage, I used to invest close to 25% of technology team's bandwidth in making the system robust and not a new innovation.
Got it.
So I would say that is the thumb rule. Start in as fast as you man and can. And then when you are relatively more mature, then a fourth of your effort should be directed only on making systems more robust, and the rest should be invested in building new stuff. And this ratio will change further. If a stack is 10 years in the making, it'll change further.
Understood, Amitabh. Very, very useful. But one aspect that I want to touch, I think, again, related to this is, but what about security? For example, what I've seen is especially a lot of young companies either would lack awareness around it or would not have the sufficient resources to tackle it at the early stages itself. But this is something which you cannot actually compromise on, right?
This is the hardest, Nitin. Yeah. This area is hardest because it requires specialization, and it requires, it's so essential for existence. But the fact is that if you invest earnestly in security, then you would almost not have a company. Security can suck so much of the resources that you will not end up building a product. How we are very fortunate, though, Nitin, is that a lot of things that we need on the security thing are now available out of the box.
Right.
So in the early stage of the company, I would rather, at some level, offload security to out of the box products, even managing the entire thing to some external consultants, because security is not something where you do product development or engineering all the time. It's periodic checks.
Correct.
Right. And the periodicity, increases as the stack goes bigger because you have more things to secure. Right. So I think in the beginning, in terms of ROI and stuff, especially for a startup, I would offload a lot of security. But you must have somebody in the company who's aware of security paradigms and is making the right choice, of picking up the right pieces. Like, for example, a lot of these web accelerators and everybody who manage your traffic, like Akamai, have a lot of products, out of the box, web firewall, there's that, DDoS defender, out of the box, and you have to just checkmark them, right?
Yeah.
And then as you go along, you can, build a dedicated security team. At some scale, you must have a dedicated security team, but not in the beginning, because security is also a black hole. It'll suck away all your resources.
I agree. And I think when you specially mentioned that a lot of things are now available, which can out of the box give you a lot of security features. So I think there are several examples, like one you mentioned, and most of the cloud providers these days have come up with a lot of out of the box features, which if somebody is just aware of, they can actually implement those.
Correct.
But maybe the larger problem today that I see, the kind of startups that I speak to, they're not even aware that what is it that they should be doing at this stage and what are the tools available. So probably there can be some more kind of an awareness issue at the moment.
Which is what I was pointing, that you must have somebody in-house who is aware, rather than give dedicated bandwidth from within the company to that effort. Just awareness is good enough, and then picking solution providers from outside is the right thing to do.
Agreed. Okay, so next question is, I think you would have had a lot of discussions around this, so I am also going to touch base on this. It's on I think what has happened in the last 2 years, how the technology landscape, especially on the teams structures, has changed. We have seen a lot of remote working coming to the picture. Some have stayed temporarily, but some has actually continued even today. And there are companies who have now built their models on top of remote working. What do you think? What has happened in the last 2 years? What has come out of it in terms of both the good and the bad?
Yeah, no, I think such profound, momentous changes in the world, obviously impact every aspect of life, and they have affected companies, and digital companies more so than any other, right? So my sense is that the shift from how we used to operate is permanent, and we are unlikely to go back to the way we used to work. Okay. That said, it's also true that we're not going to continue to work from home all the time, right? Or at least not as a matter of no choice. We will have the choice to work in office or work from home, right? So let me touch upon a few things um, which are like arguments on both sides, right? So one is that we always understood the value of being connected from everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But we were not equipped in terms of technology and investment, and there were mindset issues also, mental blocks that we could not operate. All that has opened up, right? So people have realized that a company can go out of office for 2 years and still continue to operate because of all the technology that has happened. And there are many things that they were unwilling to invest in, and they were forced to invest, and that has allowed proliferation and evolution, a faster evolution of technology that enables remote working and work from home.
Yeah.
So we've seen how the video technology, the bandwidth, and everything else that enables, and collaboration tools and such, which if it was out of choice, they would have evolved slowly. But because it was out of no choice, they got an acceleration. Now they're there. So now people can operate remotely and from home, etc., much more efficiently than they ever were able to before. And so also mind, like I said, minds have opened up, not just opening up mind leading to investment, but minds have opened up culturally within a company of how we could possibly operate, right? So I think we are better equipped, and we don't have as much mental block to make the best use of it. This is going to be very important from the point of view of that the world, the consumer world of digital, this thing is now asking for more and more technology.
Yeah.
And while they were forced into using technology, they also now see the benefits of technology being more efficient, accurate, cheaper, and so on and so forth, right? So that has accelerated digital adoption in non-digital companies as well. And that has led to a talent war. You see that great resignation and all these terms of talent war and all. Now, when the talent war is very intense, then you want to get resources from wherever they are.
True.
Like somebody has a challenge and they have to work from their home, but they can't find a job in Timbuktu where they live. Now such people will be hired and be given prominent position, right? So the third thing is basically from mental block to enabling technology to being able to pick talent from wherever you can if there's a dire need for it.
Yeah.
So these are positives which will propel hybrid and remote working and this thing. The other side that we see as negatives, which will pull people back into office organizations and the decision making and everything else into office, that there are some roles which are more suitable for working away, and some roles which are heavy on collaboration cannot operate from far.
Yeah.
So you would have noticed that there is no effective replacement of whiteboarding.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the higher up you go in the organization chain, senior executives and all, and if they're working remotely, it is not nearly as effective, right? Because decisions are made, very, very big, profound decisions are made like in few minutes.
Correct.
And on the screen, those same decisions will take days and months sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? So people need to be in a room to feel each other's body language, temperament, and how they act and make decisions and coming together, explain things on the board, the energy, the passion that is palpable when you're in person and so on and so forth, right? So how that is manifesting is that we have seen IC roles where a lot of work is around individually working on laptop and programming and such. We have been far more successful in keeping the productivity high, working away from office.
Yeah.
The higher up you go, we have seen less productivity, which has manifested in a ways that if you have a project that was initiated before pandemic, if you've had big initiatives that were initiated, continuing with them was still okay. Launching new one where you have the teams and the brainstormings and everything going on in a condensed manner are harder and harder to get. So I would say that companies which will find a mix, more senior management and more strategic thinking and more strategic decision making. The senior you get, basically if you look at an IC, they will probably spend a couple of meetings in a week, the first level. If you see the CEO of the company, all his days in meetings.
Yeah.
Then you have travel. So meeting not in just one location, but all over the world, right?
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, one has to be able to find a balance. And then there is this, you work at startups, you know what kind of energy is created when everybody can see everybody in a hall. And you have a question, you just get up, go on a whiteboard, finish it off like 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
The same thing remote is, you find time, it'll take days to find time, then you get into meetings, not quite the same interchange, and then it takes longer, right? So the speed of innovation has also suffered. So what was initiated, that speed continues in terms of executions, launching new stuff, getting unblocked on many of the stuff has just become slower. And so I think people, and then there's this psychological thing, human beings are social. So I see a lot of mental fatigue in people. A lot of people want to go and people.
I agree. Yeah.
With people, real people, not screens.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there are arguments on both sides, which means that the world will gravitate towards somewhere in the middle, and not go back to where it was, not go to the other side of the pendulum that it got swung to during the pandemic and lockdown, but somewhere in the middle.
Agree, Amitabh, and especially to the point that you touched upon towards the end. I think the mental fatigue part, I can actually relate to it, because personally, when I was working from home, it was totally working with the screen throughout the day, but working in office setup is totally different, especially for me. I can quickly speak to people, and most of the stress, even any kind of stress that you have during the work itself, that goes away the moment you start having discussions on the floor. You feel more that you have more help available, there is more support available. I personally lacked that kind of thing in a remote setup.
And you can't draw boundaries, right? Yeah. Your home seeps into your work, and your work seeps into the home. Your day doesn't end.
Yeah. I think it's more like a personal realization, like you mentioned. I think people who think it's more optimal for them to work in an office kind of setup, probably it's better for them to join. But if there is, for some reason, they think that no, remote working is something which is more optimal, they can choose that in the short run, and then maybe long term.
There is this personal thing, because at the end of the day, the personal goal have to align.
Yeah.
But there's this company thing also. The company is there to make money.
Yeah.
And it can offer job and give salaries if its work gets done in a competitively efficient manner. So there's this company perspective.
True.
And a need that a company has, and both at some level have to align, sort of.
Agreed, Amitabh. So Amitabh, we are running out of time. I'm sure, I think the kind of knowledge and experience you have, we can continue to talk forever. But today for this episode, we'll have to finish it here. But I would love to have you for some other conversation, some other time. But thank you so much, Amitabh, for sharing your perspective. I'm 100% sure, I think this was very insightful for me, and would be certainly insightful for all the audience that would actually go through this session.
Thank you, Nitin, and love being here. Thanks for having me here. And like always, I enjoy conversing with you, and hopefully we'll meet soon.
Thank you, Amitabh.
All the best.
Thanks.